Madam President, so we can start whenever you are ready. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Tariq. Good morning, everybody. Buenos días a todas y a todos. Excelencia.
Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, Administrator of the UNDP, Mr. Achim Steiner, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I have the honor to declare open the 20th session of the High-Level Committee on South-South Cooperation. I am pleased to welcome all of you to this substantive part of the 20th session of the High-Level Committee on South-South Cooperation, a very important body of the United Nations General Assembly. I would like just to say a few words myself about our work over the next few days. The High-Level Committee is being convened for the first time today since 2016. It's not that nothing has happened. This is a special day, particularly given the holding of the South-South Cooperation Conference, which was held in Buenos Aires in 2019. Argentina is taking up this chairmanship with the belief that we should work more carefully together in following up and implementing the outcome document of the BAPA plus 40. And we think it is crucial to hear from all voices so that we can foster greater South-South and triangular cooperation for the service of our peoples. This is certainly a critical juncture for us to reflect on what has been achieved since the very first South-South Cooperation Conference, which was held 43 years ago. We need to look at the challenges that remain to be overcome. The BAPA plus 40 conference allowed us to pinpoint the challenges that remain to be overcome in the domain of South-South and triangular cooperation. However, 2 years since the conference was held, the world has of course changed a great deal. Many of the challenges that we identified before have been exacerbated, and new challenges have arisen, which require innovative strategies if they are to be overcome. In this context, South-South and triangular cooperation must play a significant role in our response to and recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic and its multidimensional consequences. It is our goal to see to it that what we agreed upon 2 years ago can be given a transformative momentum at this time. To achieve this goal, we need to continue to support and strengthen the South-South Cooperation Committee. This committee must be the forum for states to reflect on the modalities for cooperation within the United Nations development system and also to reflect on its contribution to national, regional and global policies. On the basis of what was mandated in BAPA plus 40, we believe that the fundamental role of the committee is to serve as a platform for the definition of the various visions that are being rolled out at the country and regional level so that we can achieve common ground and common interests, and so that we can build up an architecture for South-South and triangular cooperation that can be effective for all. We believe that this should be our watchword as we work over the next few years, and that will be the theme of our chairmanship. At the current time, we need to foster further South-South cooperation in terms of the scope and dimension, and of course we also need to overcome the significant challenges that many countries are continuing to face, particularly countries in which there is a high level of poverty and unemployment, as well as deficits in terms of infrastructure and productive capacity, as well as vulnerabilities to external shocks. The multidimensional impact of the COVID-19 pandemic will, of course, linger beyond this year, and it will impact our collective ambition. The 2030 Agenda requires that we step up the means of implementation for developing countries, in particular when it comes to financing, the exchange of information and best practices, technology, and capacity building. We must be mindful of the fact that the decisions that we take will determine the way in which we attempt to achieve these goals. In spite of their limitations, many developing countries are playing a critical role in supporting other nations through South-South and triangular cooperation. This is an effort that should be recognized by the international community. It is encouraging to see how, in these difficult times, countries of the South have improved their cooperation. They have managed to exchange best practices, for instance, by helping out with the delivery of medical equipment. This has all helped to mitigate the spread of COVID-19 and to accelerate the recovery. Today, more than ever, we recognize how valuable this assistance is, particularly when it comes to the exchange of good practices between countries. That is critical, as is cooperation in critical areas, including technology transfer and trade, and the equitable distribution of vaccines. The pandemic makes it crucial that we adopt appropriate measures when it comes to the movement of people and the delivery of medical equipment to save as many lives as we can. In this way, the form of South-South cooperation, and in particular the implementation of projects on the ground, will require new measures that allow us to overcome the restrictions on the mobility of experts, to foster further cooperation for sustainable development. Countries of the Global South need the support of the United Nations system and partners from the North to improve human and institutional capacity that are required for the appropriate definition and implementation of policies, strategies, and national development programs, and for mechanisms for coordination. In order for coordination to help us overcome the structural barriers that developing countries face, our chairmanship believes that we must take a comprehensive approach, including looking at the need to set up sustainable financing mechanisms, which can be updated to the particular needs of developing countries. The international community must join efforts to find innovative ways of mobilizing resources for development that can be complementary and not replace North-South cooperation and ODA. We also must promote alliances with other development stakeholders, including in the private-public domain, and multi-stakeholder alliances that can promote the social development of our nations. The opportunities that they can provide in the attainment of the SDGs are a critical issue when it comes to the way in which we discuss these issues in international fora and fora for development cooperation. Multi-stakeholder alliances can provide new momentum to our efforts to achieve development, and they can help the implementation of national policies in this domain. Sustainable financing mechanisms also need to bear in mind the specific needs of countries when it comes to accessing global goods, without forgetting about differentiated responsibilities when it comes to promoting and fulfilling the commitments that have been undertaken. We must all work together to combat global threats such as COVID-19 without leaving anyone behind. And in this context, and in addition to what is stated in the reports presented for this session, from our chairmanship, I would like to congratulate the countries of the South who have worked together to mitigate the spread of COVID-19 and mitigate the pandemic's negative impacts. We encourage our partners in the North and countries in the South and other stakeholders to continue to enhance support for developing countries and the most vulnerable people. We hope that this 20th session will provide an opportunity for us to reaffirm more effective approaches for South-South and triangular cooperation, to accelerate and deepen our efforts to build a healthier, more resilient, and more sustainable and safer world. In this context, the subject for our discussion here is to accelerate the achievement of the SDGs through the effective implementation of the outcome document of the BAPA Plus 40 conference in response to the COVID-19 crisis and to similar global crises. We trust that our chairmanship of the committee will be able to help to achieve further deepening of South-South and triangular cooperation so that we can facilitate alliances that allow us to achieve concrete progress in line with the key aspects of development. We believe that we have very important work to do, and I am certain that the office, myself, our bureau, will together be able to enjoy the complete cooperation of all of you so that we can achieve success in this session. As you will recall, distinguished delegates, the agenda for this session was adopted at the organizational meeting of the 11th of May, and the program of work for the meeting was also adopted back then. So, having said that, I would now like to invite the administrator of the United Nations Development Programme, Mr. Achim Steiner, to take the floor and to provide a statement to the committee. You have the floor, Mr. Steiner.
Madam President, distinguished delegates, I'm delighted to join the Ambassador, our President, to welcome you all to the 20th session of the High-Level Committee on South-South Cooperation. I would like to extend my congratulations to Her Excellency Maria del Carmen Squef, Permanent Representative of Argentina, and to our other distinguished colleagues, members from Qatar, Lithuania, Portugal, and Nigeria, elected to serve on the Bureau of the 20th session of the High-Level Committee. We look forward to working closely with you during the session. Please, Madam President, allow me also to express my gratitude to His Excellency Adonia Ayebare, Permanent Representative of Uganda, and his predecessor, His Excellency Ambassador Richard Nduhura, for leading the High-Level Committee over the past 5 years. And I would like to extend our special thanks to Colombia, Romania, Switzerland, and Indonesia for their sterling work during the 19th session of the committee. Madam President, distinguished guests, between 2016, when this committee last met, until the pandemic hit in 2020, many countries made significant progress on human development. This has been brought to a sudden halt due to the unprecedented socioeconomic shockwaves of the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic has widened inequalities, weakened health and social security systems, and amplified also the digital divide. Yet, the pandemic has shown us how quickly we can act. how countries and communities can, when faced with an unprecedented emergency or crisis, rally round, come together, and show solidarity with one another. This has been the defining feature of South-South cooperation, and the world needs to learn from these experiences. In the wake of the pandemic, 120 developing countries have been supporting each other in pivotal areas, from procuring and sharing life-saving medical supplies and sending health workers to bridge gaps in capacity, mobilizing vital finance and food supplies, to collaborating in science, technology, and innovation. Indeed, South-South and triangular cooperation is an intrinsic part of UNDP's response to the pandemic too, accounting for approximately 17% of our COVID-19 projects last year. Madam President, I see three key areas where we need to take action to maintain this newfound momentum: finance, debt, and the green economy, vaccine equity, and the digital revolution, and to leverage South-South and triangular cooperation as a crucial vehicle to accelerate progress in these key areas. Firstly, as our sister agency UNEP and Oxford University have highlighted in a recent report, advanced economies outspent emerging and developing countries by a factor of 17-1 on green recovery measures. The Global South is in danger of being left behind in the green recovery. Part of the solution lies also in the UN's joined-up support that we can mobilize. UNDP has developed a green recovery framework, also in partnership with UNEP, UNCTAD, ILO, and FAO, to ensure that countries receive the very best of support from our system on issues such as energy transition, on climate adaptation and mitigation, and on nature-based solutions. And UNDP's climate promise, now implemented in 118 countries, is currently the world's largest offer of support for the enhancements of countries' national climate strategies and pledges. It is helping countries to transition to that future low-carbon green economy that will also create new green and decent jobs. And through this support, countries are unlocking brand new sources of private finance, domestic and international, which can be used to invest in clean, renewable, and affordable energy, but also access to energy, a key aim of also the upcoming UN high-level dialogue on energy. And UNDP's flagship initiative, SDG Impact, is laying out a business and investment case for investors to align their activities with the global goals. Our SDG Impact standards for bond issuers that we have developed over the last 1.5 years were recently used by the New Development Bank to issue a Sustainable Development Goals bond valued at $767 million in March of this year. New instruments like this and sharing knowledge in this emerging area will be vital to power a green recovery. Indeed, debt relief measures will be key. Consider, for instance, the fact that less than 1% of debt service for this year, 2021, would cover the cost of 1 billion vaccine doses under the COVAX initiative. And we need new mechanisms to address the crushing debt that countries face as they try to build forward greener and better. For instance, innovative instruments such as debt for nature swaps, but also others along these lines, can help to align COVID-19 recovery financing with SDG financing. Combining crisis management with investing in the future of development path and recovery has also been at the core of UNDP's advocacy since last year. This is also a central objective of the integrated national financing frameworks which the UN system and our partners are currently helping to develop and implement in now 71 countries. Madam President, distinguished delegates. Secondly, consider the fact that just 0.3% of vaccine doses have been administered to date in low-income countries. As my colleague Tedros, Dr. Tedros, has starkly highlighted this month, a small group of countries that make and buy the majority of the world's vaccines also control de facto the fate of the rest of the world at this point. Yet ensuring that developing countries have access to the vaccine is a prudent investment. Our colleagues at the International Monetary Fund estimate that a $50 billion in funding, primarily through wealthy nations, to vaccinate individuals in developing countries would yield an astonishing $9 trillion in further financial progress by the year 2025 by controlling the pandemic earlier. And thirdly, we must sustain the unprecedented wave of digital innovation created in the wake of COVID-19 that will power the future of development, a wave that in fact is being invented as rapidly in the countries of the South as in countries of the North right now. Look also to the work of our UNDP Accelerator Labs network, something we like to refer to as the world's largest and fastest learning network on sustainable development challenges. The labs identified and engaged with over 1,700 local solutions in the year 2020 alone, an indicator of how central South-South and triangular cooperation can be by looking to innovation and entrepreneurship within countries and then to connect them. To give just one example of its contribution to South-South cooperation, the India Accelerator Lab rapidly developed an app aimed at tackling COVID-19 misinformation. So successful was the app, developed in a matter of weeks, that it was then adapted and approached in Morocco, Cabo Verde, and Timor-Leste, just to give one example. And UNDP and the International Telecommunication Union have just launched a joint facility for digital capacity development in response to the Secretary General's Digital Cooperation Agenda, which will help to equip people across the world with new digital skills to allow them to take advantage of the ongoing digital revolution. This must be complemented with new efforts to extend affordable broadband to the 3 billion people still unconnected. And digital technology holds incredible promise to extend advanced inclusive governance and extend social protection, something that we have learned sometimes at very short notice during this pandemic. We now need to share such best practices even more quickly, ensuring that communities across the globe are more resilient for the next global shock, which we know will come at some point. Madam President, in the wake of COVID-19, the added value of South-South and triangular cooperation is perhaps more apparent than ever. The challenge now is to build on and sustain this new momentum while fostering strategic partnerships, including in the pivotal areas of finance, debt, and the green economy, vaccine access and equity, and the digital revolution. UNDP is very proud to host and support the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation as the system-wide focal point on South-South cooperation. I would like to commend the Office for coordinating the formulation of the UN system-wide strategy on South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation. And as we design the next UNDP strategic plan, we are also examining closely how to further boost South-South and triangular cooperation as an integral part of how we work in the future. In sum, the entire United Nations system stands with the Global South, supporting countries to make the right choices today that will define the well-being of people and planet for generations to come. And the answers lie literally within every country that you today represent and that you convened also so successfully in Buenos Aires for BAPA Plus 40. Madam President, distinguished delegates, thank you for this opportunity to address you this morning.
Sí, muchas gracias, señor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Steiner. I would particularly like to thank the Administrator for the important statement. I feel confident that his words will inspire us and enrich our deliberations over the next few days. We very much look forward to working closely with Mr. Steiner and his staff, and especially with our Secretariat, the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation, hosted by UNDP during this session, and in the actions that will be taken following the session. We will now move to agenda item 2. The committee will now begin its general debate on the substantive items of its agenda, namely items 2, 3, 4, and 5. First, on item 2, we have the review of progress made in implementing the Buenos Aires Plan of Action for promoting and implementing technical cooperation among developing countries, the New Directions Strategy for South-South Cooperation, and the Nairobi Outcome Document of the High-Level United Nations Conference on South-South Cooperation. Then, on item 3, we have follow-up actions arising from previous sessions of the High-Level Committee on South-South Cooperation, including with regard to events to mark the 40th anniversary of the adoption of the Buenos Aires Plan of Action. Item 4 pertains to the consideration of the report of the Secretary-General on progress made in implementing Decision 19/1 of the High-Level Committee. Item 5 is the consideration of the report of the Administrator of the United Nations Development Programme. A. Implementation of the framework of operational guidelines on United Nations support to South-South and triangular cooperation. B. Organizational, administrative, and financial arrangements of the United Nations Development Programme in support of South-South cooperation, including efforts to enhance the role and impact of the UN Office for South-South Cooperation. The committee has before it documents SSC/20/1 and SSC/20/2, which constitute the relevant documentation for these items that I have just laid out. Delegations that have not already done so are kindly reminded to inscribe their names on the list of speakers before 5 p.m. today. This will enable the Secretariat to organize our work in an efficient manner. As we agreed at the organizational meeting, statements will be limited to 8 minutes for representative of groups of member states or regional groups, 5 minutes for representative of member states, and 3 minutes for other participants. So I will now proceed to introduce the Director ad interim of the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation. To begin this general discussion, I would like to give the floor, therefore, to Mr. Adel Abdelatif, Director ad interim of the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation, to introduce the respective documents and reports relating to items 2, 3, 4, and 5 of the agenda. On behalf of the committee, I would like very warmly to welcome him and thank him and the UN Office for South-South Cooperation for the very efficient Secretariat services provided to the high-level committee. This has been of great help to our committee. So having said that, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Abdelatif. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I feel greatly honored to address this 20th session of the High-Level Committee, and I would like to join the UNDP Administrator in congratulating you and your new Bureau as you assume leadership of this body. The United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation stands ready to work closely with you during this session and throughout your term leading this committee. I would like also to thank His Excellency Ambassador Adonia Aibar, Permanent Representative of Uganda to the United Nations, and his predecessor, His Excellency Ambassador Richard Ndudura, for presiding over the High-Level Committee during the past 5 years. I salute the other members of the Bureau for their outstanding work. It is my pleasure to introduce the reports of the UNDP Administrator and the United Nations Secretary General that have been submitted for the committee's consideration. The first report, SSC/20/1, is entitled The Review of Progress Made in Implementing the Buenos Aires Plan of Action, the New Directions Strategy for South-South Cooperation, and the Nairobi Outcome Document of the High-Level United Nations Conference on South-South Cooperation. The report traces progress in South-South and triangular cooperation through the lens of the purpose, scope, priority sectors, and principles for the South-South cooperation as laid out in those three foundational documents. The UNDP administrator observes that during the reporting period 2016-2020, South-South cooperation occurred in a global context marked by significant human progress and devastating crisis. He contrasts the gains made in reducing poverty by 2019 and the challenges we face due to the COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, violent conflicts, and similar threats to humanity. Despite such drawbacks, the report is a reason for optimism owing to how developing countries continue to pursue the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals and other development objectives through cooperation with notable support by their northern partners and the United Nations system. Due to time limitations, allow me to present to you a synopsis of the report's contents. Madam President, among the key trends highlighted in the report is the strengthening of regional integration. A second notable trend is the growing number of actors participating in South-South initiatives. A third trend is the programmatic approach to South-South collaboration illustrated by the Ibero-American countries. A fourth trend is the broadening of partnerships witnessed in increasing support for triangular cooperation. The measures taken by the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation to improve the transparency and accountability are also highlighted in the report, focusing on how the Office fully implemented the recommendations of the UNDP Office of Audit and Investigations. Key among the report's conclusions and recommendations is the need to establish or strengthen national policies and departments to bolster South-South and triangular cooperation, implement the United Nations system-wide strategy for South-South and triangular cooperation, mobilize more resources from the public and private sector toward the implementation of impactful programs with well-defined time frames and measurable results. Enhance the human and institutional activities of developing countries to accelerate the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, reduce inequalities within and between countries through improved access to quality education in science, technology, and innovation in order for developing countries to have more effective capacities to harness modern technologies in their development efforts and share policies and practices that have proven effective in alleviating poverty in its many dimensions. The second document before you, SSC/20/2, is a report of the United Nations Secretary General in the progress made in implementing Decision 19/1 of the High-Level Committee on South-South Cooperation, with emphasis on enhancing the role and impact of the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation, and in implementing decisions contained in the outcome document of the second high-level United Nations Conference on South-South Cooperation. The Secretary General responds to earlier requests of this committee by highlighting the measures taken since 2016 to strengthen the role and impact of the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation. Against that backdrop, the report highlights the actions taken to strengthen the role and impact of the Office. These endeavors relied primarily on the resources of UNDP, which funded the formulation and implementation of 2 strategic frameworks of the Office. Notably, other organizations of the United Nations Development System also partnered with the Office to support member states' South-South initiatives aimed at meeting the Sustainable Development Goals. The enhanced role and impact of the Office was illustrated through effective performance in carrying out its functions and the results that were achieved. Besides being the secretariat of this high-level committee, the Office also continued to coordinate United Nations support to South-South and triangular cooperation. It formed partnerships and help member states in building human and institutional capacities through cutting-edge research, knowledge sharing, and advisory services. The office also managed several funds for South-South cooperation and high-demand programs in partnership with member states. The office also conducted strategic advocacy and outreach. Notable achievements included the establishment of the United Nations Interagency Mechanism for South-South and Triangle Cooperation and the formulation of the United Nations system-wide strategy on South-South and Triangle Cooperation. The report also describes support by the United Nations Development System in response to COVID-19 and related efforts for building back better after the pandemic. In this regard, the Secretary General emphasizes that if the virus is left to spread in the global south, it will mutate again and again to the peril of all countries and regions. To help improve United Nations system-wide coherence and the coordination and the contribution of South-South and Triangle cooperation to the attainment of the 2030 Agenda, the Secretary General recommends that United Nations organizations should implement the United Nations system-wide strategy on South-South and Triangle cooperation at the headquarters, country, and regional levels following the respective mandates and specific strategic plans. Member states in a position to do so should contribute more to the work of the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation to ensure that the office has the necessary human and financial resources to do its work. The United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation and members of the United Nations Interagency Mechanism for South-South Cooperation should use digital and other modern technologies to improve the South-South and Triangle cooperation methodologies, including those for facilitating policy dialogue, the sharing of knowledge and experience, as well as the identification of effective policies and strategies responsive to global crises such as pandemics and climate change. United Nations organizations working in similar sectors should harmonize the support to South-South and Triangle cooperation. Developing countries should strengthen South-South cooperation aimed at the creation of conducive environments for South-South trade and other forms of economic cooperation through, for example, investments in public goods, health, and a skilled workforce. Developed and developing countries should consider increasing the support for the mechanism established to prevent the spread of the coronavirus pandemic, including the COVAX facility to ensure equitable distribution of the COVID-19 vaccines. Partnerships to enhance human solidarity should build upon growing global interdependence illustrated during the pandemic by the thousands of doctors, nurses, and other essential workers from the global south who are firmly embedded in the workforce of many developed countries. The 20th session of the High-Level Committee should consider measures calibrated to enable LDCs to graduate from that status and to empower other developing countries to overcome the middle income trap. Madam President, among the documents submitted to the committee for information only are the report of the BAPA Plus 40 conference, two reports of the UNDP Office of Audit and Investigations, and the United Nations system-wide strategy on South-South and Triangle cooperation. Madam President, I would like to seize this opportunity to thank UNDP for continuing hosting the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation. And in conclusion, permit me to express my gratitude to all the heads of United Nations entities which have joined the United Nations Interagency Mechanism for South-South and Triangle Cooperation. The United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation has embarked upon the formulation of a strategic framework for 2021-2025, and we look forward to your guidance during this session on how we can invigorate support to member states' South-South and Triangle cooperation efforts to meet the Sustainable Development Goals during the current decade of action. Thank you, Madam President.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. I thank the director, Mr. Abdelatif. I would also like to thank the interpreters who are having a couple of difficulties and struggling somewhat to hear us. So my thanks to the interpreters for their efforts. This session would not be possible without our interpreters. We will now begin the general debate, and I will give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Mia Amor Motley, the Prime Minister of Barbados. And we will hear a pre-recorded video statement.
Madam President, I want to begin by congratulating you and the other members of the Bureau on your recent election to lead this important committee. Permit me also to use this opportunity to commend the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation on successfully organizing this 20th high-level session in virtual and hybrid formats at this critical moment. When we speak of South-South cooperation, what is it really that we're speaking about? At its heart is the idea that with the proper support from the international community, developing countries have the potential, the ability, and the will to support one another in their development paths. And let me take it one step further. South-South cooperation must also work towards the reshaping of the international system itself to produce equitable outcomes for all countries. And that is largely because many of us simply did not exist at the time of the settlement of many of the institutions to which we now belong. We want to be able to reflect our perspective in a real and meaningful way, in ways that will allow us to benefit across the South, such that these organizations can give full expression for the purposes for which they were created. In the short term, in responding to our present global crisis, there can be no doubt of the benefits that South-South cooperation has already generated for many of us. Let me cite two important examples from which my own country, Barbados, benefited, and which illustrate how well the system can work. On a bilateral basis, fellow developing countries such as Cuba, the United Arab Emirates, Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, to name but a few, have assisted Barbados in our fight against COVID-19. They shared much-needed reagents for testing, donated medical equipment, and dispatched medical brigades to bolster our healthcare system. Equally, we received assistance from our friends in China. And within the Caribbean region, we have, through our regional institutions, been sharing data, equipment, and vaccines from as far north as Cayman Islands to as far south as I indicated in Guyana. This assistance is a living example of being your brother's keeper. I want to thank publicly each of the heads of state and my fellow heads of government for coming to our aid in our time of need. I would like at this juncture to also acknowledge the assistance provided by the government of India. At a time when developing countries like mine were unable to procure much-needed vaccines as a result of vaccine nationalism, Prime Minister Modi made a significant donation of vaccines to CARICOM, and many of our countries benefited in ways that we can truly, truly say thank you for. This is truly the ideal and the reality of South-South cooperation at its best. But my friends, we have to look beyond this immediate crisis to other equally grave, longer-term systemic issues, which together we must work to address. I've already referred to the whole issue of international institutions to which many of us belong. But there are also two others that stand out. First is the matter of fair access to development finance. Barbados's classification as a highly indebted middle-income country, above middle income for some, has meant that for more than a decade there has been very limited access to concessional development funding. Indeed, we have been left, for the most part, to look at the markets. We have been advocating over the course of the last few years that this needs to change and that we need more inclusive mechanisms that will allow our countries to truly benefit from the concessional funds that are available, and that more often than not, this depends on other criteria beyond per capita income that is historic. More specifically, we have called for a more enabling global environment to consider the unique vulnerabilities faced by countries such as ours that are small island developing states. What we need is a fairer measure of that vulnerability. As chair of the Development Committee, I've been making this call, and again, I'm calling for an agreement on a multi-dimensional vulnerability index, which would replace historic per capita income. This measure of the use of historic per capita income is unfairly applied in many instances to small island developing states who are at the front line of different levels of vulnerability, financial, social, and environmental. As states within the global south, we know too well our experiences, whether as small island developing states or as middle-income countries that have limited access to capital markets. It is for that reason that you heard me call earlier for the urgent need for a reform of the international architecture, in particular, the international financial architecture. We have been arguing this issue of vulnerability for over 3 decades, and we believe that it is now ripe for us to see movement on this criteria, largely because we are seeing the vulnerabilities play out themselves day by day, week by week, year by year. It is therefore imperative that we harness South-South solidarity and action to reshape it. The second issue, of course, is our battle against the climate crisis. This is an existential threat, as we all know. Our country is doing its best to play its part. We hosted the virtual 22nd meeting of the Forum of Ministers of Environment of Latin America and the Caribbean in January of this year. The meeting saw regional ministers come together on a range of environmental issues and called for urgent action for sustainable development in the next decade. We have a duty to future generations to take the action now to save our environment, for we simply have limited space and limited buffer. In this area, the Caribbean continues to engage in South-South cooperation, including with the UAE's Caribbean Renewable Energy Fund, to develop climate-resilient infrastructure at the national level. And finally, my friends, Barbados will become the smallest country ever to host UNCTAD when UNCTAD 15 takes place from October 3rd to October 8th later this year in a blended format, half in person, half live streaming. The theme for this important forum is, and I quote, "From inequality and vulnerability to prosperity for all." This is a noble objective, and the opportunity for dialogue will offer the nations of the world a platform to devise new ways to use trade as an enabler of sustainable development. We have been placed off track in the last 16 months because of this awful pandemic. It is therefore more than ever critical that we meet to see how we can do these things to achieve this enabling of sustainable development through trade as we go forward. We also believe that the conference will play a pivotal role in supporting and strengthening South-South cooperation through trade integration, regional, sub-regional, and inter-regional economic integration. Madam President, Barbados believes that in tandem with North-South cooperation, South-South cooperation constitutes one of the cornerstones in the construction of a more inclusive, just, and sustainable post-pandemic world. We must continue to harness this cooperation mechanism to fight against poverty and against inequality. We must deepen our cooperation so that the international system can better reflect the needs of all of our countries, so that we can have a brighter and better future for all of our children. The time is upon us to recommit, and I ask all of us so to do. I'm obliged to you. Thank you very much.
A la primera ministra.
I would like to thank the Prime Minister of Barbados for her statement. The next speaker is Mr. Felipe Solá, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Argentina. A very good morning to you all. I am very pleased to be able to be present at this 20th session of the UN High-Level Committee for South-South Cooperation, of whose preparatory process we had the honor of being part. I would particularly like to greet the Office for South-South Cooperation and the members of the Bureau and commend the work that has been done together with our mission. And I would like to thank Ambassador Squeff, our representative, for her work in this domain. This is a special occasion for us because we are beginning our presidency of the committee's bureau. We are shouldering this responsibility with the goal in mind of contributing to implementing what was agreed upon at the in the outcome document of the second UN High-Level Conference for South-South Cooperation, or BAPA Plus 40. Some half-century ago, roughly, the UN defined the road forward, a necessary roadmap to generate better mechanisms for technical cooperation between developing countries. That was the Buenos Aires Action Plan of action. In a world that is characterized by the East-West rivalry, our countries explored alternative ways for international relations that can contribute to national development programs and strengthen the room for international cooperation through political dialogue. To realize this commitment to South-South relations in Latin America, Asia, and Africa, we have generated various initiatives and cooperation frameworks to allow us to exchange experiences and knowledge. We have also made progress in the development of normative frameworks and methodologies, which have fostered the progressive consolidation of South-South cooperation as a public policy. As we are all aware, international strategies for cooperation cannot be disassociated from the circumstances of the COVID-19 pandemic. In particular, when we are seeing a profound divergence between the North and the South in this context because of the significant differences in the economic conditions of our countries and the limited access to sources of financing. As a recent UNCTAD report has borne out, the international responses have been inadequate to allow the South to recover. And that is why bolder and more comprehensive measures need to be taken. We believe that enhancing international financing, ensuring the sustainability of external debt, health cooperation, and industrial recovery, focusing on the provision of critical goods and services, are just some of the key aspects that should guide our work. In order to do this, we need to have the support of the United Nations system as a whole. This will allow developing countries to broaden our access to experiences and knowledge from other countries of the South, and to engage with new partners to mobilize the necessary resources to achieve a sustainable, equitable recovery. To achieve these targets, it will be critical for us to support the strengthening of the South-South Cooperation Committee and the Office for South-South Cooperation, because they can follow up the UN cooperation programs and initiatives. In sum, over the last few decades, South-South cooperation has shown its huge value to strengthen the productive and technological capacities of developing countries. It has had a positive impact on our trade and financial flows, and it has allowed us to achieve greater sovereign and equal participation in the international system. We trust that the Argentinian presidency of the committee will help us to consolidate this historic achievement through the institutional strengthening of South-South cooperation and through the development of alliances that will allow us to roll out key projects for development. Thank you.
The
next speaker on the list is Mr. Abdullah Shaheed, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Maldives.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, Administrator of UNDP, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. In 2019, I witnessed the adoption of the Buenos Aires outcome document of the second high-level United Nations Conference on South-South Cooperation. I conveyed the commitment of the government of Maldives to search for new avenues of cooperation and establish new partnerships to promote South-South cooperation. Because we firmly believe that South-South and triangular cooperation could be, if not is, one of the main drivers of regional cooperation and stability, of increased commerce, investments, and exchange of information and technology. We believe so because we historically have been a beneficiary of the North-South and South-South cooperation. Our partnerships across the globe helped us graduate from the least developed country status in 2011. It propelled us to an upper middle income country, boosted our human capacity and material resources. Over the years, the number of tourists that visit our shores from developing countries has increased. Tertiary sector investments in the Maldives from developing countries have increased. Support for capacity building and peer learning from developing countries also have increased. On our part, over the past 2.5 years, since President Ibrahim Mohamed Saleh took office, we have made sustained efforts to expand our reach to the global south. We have reached out to all countries to establish diplomatic relations. We have made efforts to deepen relations with countries with which we have established formal relationships with. We have expanded our interaction in multilateral forums. Our efforts have yielded considerable results, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. As an import-dependent country reliant on tourism for its foreign currency receipts, the COVID-19 pandemic hit the country hard. With the closing of our borders and those around the world, our country became a no-income country overnight. But our partners came to our support, including our friends in the global south, through the contribution of materials, healthcare workers, essential commodities, and financing. In the absence of our traditional markets for tourism, more and more tourists have started arriving from the global south. South-South cooperation has been key in ensuring that we recover from COVID-19. Solidarity has been key in giving us hope in these very trying times. And it is solidarity that will take us forward too in rebuilding sustainably, in building back better, building back stronger, and building back greener and bluer. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Addis Ababa Action Agenda both recognize South-South cooperation as an important element of international cooperation for development. Of course, this is not a substitute for North-South cooperation. The global North has a moral and political obligation to support countries in the global South. Through transfer of technology, through provision of finance, this is one of the key principles of the Buenos Aires Plan of Action. And it was reiterated in BAPA +40 in 2019. Excellencies, the future of South-South cooperation should not be the past trend of North-South cooperation. It should instead be one that is based on solidarity, equality, and mutual respect. The individual and collective interests of countries in the global South must be to foster an international order that inspires action, to recover from COVID-19, to achieve the SDGs, to protect our planet, and to respect the rights of all. Before I conclude, I would also like to thank the UN Office for South-South Cooperation and the UN Development System for the concerted efforts in facilitating South-South and triangular cooperation. The Maldives sees the benefits of these programs, and our focus remains on supporting the development and delivery of these programs. I thank you.
Agradezco al representante.
I would like to thank the representative of the Maldives. The next speaker on my list is the distinguished representative of Timor-Leste, Ms. Adalgisa Albertina Xavier Reyes Magno.
The Secretary General of the United Nations, Honorable Mr. Antonio Guterres, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, on behalf of the government of Timor-Leste, I would like to congratulate you, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Honorable Mr. Antonio Guterres, and the Office of the South-South Cooperation for convening this important meeting. This is the first time for Timor-Leste to participate in this high-level conference of South-South cooperation, which enables us to discuss and share our perspectives in further advancing the common agenda of South-South cooperation. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated the existing structural challenges. Furthermore, in the midst of the challenges of the pandemic, we continue to battle the effects of climate change, which puts more people in vulnerable situations, and this undermines the progress made. These setbacks are thwarting the realization of the 2030 Agenda and the Istanbul Programme of Action for LDCs. But with the implementation of the COVID-19 vaccination programs, we are making progress towards a gradual recovery. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, Timor-Leste reaffirms its strong commitment to the realization of the 2030 Agenda and the eradication of poverty, improving infrastructure and basic services to its people, and promoting peace, inclusion, and institutional building as the foundation for achieving the SDG in the three dimensions of the economic, social, and environmental as stipulated in each SDG's roadmap. Despite the progress made in poverty reduction, the number of people living below the poverty line remains high, especially those who live in rural areas. Significant challenges continue to persist in Timor-Leste in the work of improving human capital development. For instance, the prevalence of both stunted and wasting food insecurity and malnutrition directly result in poverty, coupled with the absence of strong private sectors and excessive dependency on public financing. Timor-Leste continues to face its major challenges of financing its development projects, such as the diversification of the source of income and the generation of jobs in order to engage and support the growing young population in the country. Moreover, we have seen the benefits of seasonal workers programs. However, we need to retain that said workforce and transition them into our domestic development. This plan of action, though, will require financial and technological assistance, which will offer potential opportunities to thrive. The South-South and triangular cooperation continue to play an important complementary role in the global partnership for development and enhance national efforts to overcome challenges and achieving sustainable development. Timor-Leste attested to the importance of South-South and triangular cooperation as growing dimensions of development cooperation for the achievement of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and other internationally agreed development goals. Timor-Leste profoundly appreciates and thanks its development partners and the UN system that are supporting Timor-Leste in its development trajectory through the channel of South-South and triangular cooperation to develop its key sectors of development such as agriculture, education, and tourism, including assisting the government efforts in responding to the current crisis of the pandemic and the devastating climate disasters that hit the country in April this year. Timor-Leste strongly believes that South-South and triangular cooperation are a driving force and an enabler of a world of peace, equality, and dignity for all. Timor-Leste is fully committed to the realization of the Dili Declaration to advocate for country-led peace and state building, and for it to be at the core of any humanitarian and development cooperation in countries affected by conflict and fragility as the core principle of G7 Plus platform. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. To conclude, Timor-Leste believes that South-South and triangular cooperation are a complement to, not a substitute for, North-South cooperation, and the need for global solidarity to deliver the decade of action of SDGs and realize the commitments as reiterated in the Addis Ababa Action Agenda and the Paris Agreement to ensure a resilient recovery from the pandemic and foster a green economy to achieve the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. And based on the values and principles of multilateralism, together we can overcome the global challenges and see a harmonious, sustainable, and resilient world for all. Thank you.
Agradezco.
I thank the representative of Timor-Leste for her statement. The next speaker on my list is the distinguished representative of Guatemala, Mr. Pedro Molo, Foreign Affairs Minister.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As we face this pandemic and all the consequences of COVID-19, we must promote South-South cooperation to achieve the exchange of knowledge, technologies and experiences, and the development of capacities and the strengthening of human and institutional resources. South-South cooperation should not replace North-South cooperation. Much less should it be evaluated using North-South standards. To recover from this pandemic, we must strengthen multilateralism, cooperation, and international solidarity. The COVID-19 vaccine must be declared a common good of humanity, and the necessary financial resources must be provided to ensure access to the vaccine and to ensure that it is equitably distributed to all peoples of the world. Capacities must be established to guarantee its production and distribution in developing countries. South-South cooperation, including triangular cooperation, is crucial for the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. It will allow us to have access to technological resources, knowledge, training, always respecting sovereignty and solidarity, as well as national development plans, social and economic policies, without any kinds of strings attached. We urge the international community to considerably increase investment in public health to avoid this kind of health emergency from happening again. The efforts made by developing countries to recover from the pandemic and to implement the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, particularly in the fight to eradicate poverty, are hampered by the imposition of unilateral coercive measures. These indirectly affect South-South cooperation, and during a pandemic, they hinder universal access to vaccines and treatments developed to address COVID-19 in an equitable and affordable way. The immediate suspension of any unilateral coercive economic measures imposed on peoples, such measures must immediately be suspended, particularly in developing countries. These illegal sanctions seriously affect national economies, becoming a crime against humanity. South-South solidarity should not be used as an excuse for developed countries to continue to fail to fulfill their commitments. These countries must uphold their commitments in terms of ODA, technology transfer, and capacity building. We would like to thank Cuba. Even in the pandemic, and as it suffers from a criminal embargo, it has sent medical brigades to many countries to help them to face the pandemic. We would also like to extend our gratitude to India for its valuable donation of COVID-19 vaccines. This is an example of the maximum expression of South-South cooperation. We must transform the current unjust economic order, which is a product of global capitalism, into one that allows us to respond to the growing and frequent crises. We must strengthen multilateralism, solidarity, and North-South cooperation to accelerate the attainment of the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. This must all be complemented by South-South cooperation to allow us to respond effectively to the pandemic and to recover to create a better world without poverty or inequality, with social justice and in harmony with Mother Earth. Thank you very much.
De Nicaragua.
Thank you very much to the speaker from Nicaragua. The chair corrects herself. That was the speaker from Nicaragua. And now I would like to give the floor to the speaker of Guatemala, Mr. Pedro Brolo. You have the floor. Madam President, it is a pleasure for me to take part in this 20th session of the Committee for South-South Cooperation. We are meeting for the first time since the convening of the second UN Conference on South-South Cooperation, BAPA Plus 40, which was held in Argentina in 2019. The high rank of the participants in this meeting shows how committed countries are to achieving the 2030 Agenda and to implementing our own national targets. We are grateful for the Secretary-General's reports and the report provided by the Administrator of the UNDP, which lays out the progress made in terms of South-South cooperation and the role played by the United Nations in responding to the pandemic caused by COVID-19. I would like to begin by stating that the President of Guatemala has been implementing a policy which is in synergy with our national development priorities and which are linked to the integration process which derives from our national development plan, which is called CATUN, our Guatemala 2032. This aims to bring our national interests into line with the 2030 Agenda as a means of achieving sustainable development. I wish to reiterate that Guatemala believes strongly in the principles underpinning South-South cooperation. Cooperation between developing countries is of critical importance if we are to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and fulfill the commitments deriving therefrom, so as to leave no one behind. Bearing in mind the fact that South-South cooperation is a complement to, but not a replacement for, North-South cooperation. That is why, bearing in mind the fact that Guatemala is considered to be a middle-income country which is facing economic, social and environmental vulnerabilities, we promote multidimensional measures that go beyond per capita income for the adjudication of cooperation and ODA. In this context, we also would like to underscore the important role of cooperation between middle-income countries and other developing countries, which can be borne out in terms of financial, technical support, technology transfer, and capacity building. And that is why I would reiterate that it is so important for Guatemala not to be excluded from cooperation or partnership agreements, nor from international instruments that contain blended financing elements. And I wish to underscore the value of platforms for the exchange of knowledge and the fundamental value of South-South and triangular cooperation for middle-income countries, because they can play a dual role as they can both provide and receive this kind of cooperation. We are convinced that a greater participation of middle-income countries in international cooperation initiatives can have a multiplier effect to the benefit of all developing countries. We appreciate the efforts made by the United Nations system to develop useful tools such as the Human Development Index, which was developed by the UNDP, or the Multidimensional Vulnerability Index, which help us to make more precise assessments of development so that we can take more informed, better informed decisions when it comes to the rolling out of national and global policies. We're grateful also for the fact that in the SG's report there is a proposal for this session to consider calibrated measures to help countries avoid the trap that can befall middle-income countries. Madam President, Guatemala has recently launched its catalogue for offers and requests for South-South cooperation. This is an effort to benefit from and also provide this kind of cooperation. We have therefore, with this in mind, aimed to continue with our reduction, for instance, our reduction of greenhouse gases, achieve the empowerment of rural entrepreneurial women, rolling out local development through the achievement of public-private alliances, and so on and so forth. We have also worked actively on triangular cooperation projects. We have exchanged best practices in terms of water provision, sanitation, health, food security, agriculture, good governance, and the transfer of remittances, for instance. We are seeking to increase our portfolio of cooperation projects, and that is why we hope that this meeting will provide a turning point to inject new momentum into the exchanges between countries so that we can help the most vulnerable people, including women, youth, children, indigenous peoples, and migrants. We believe that we need to bolster accountability mechanisms. We need to ensure that governments work transparently and are accountable, to allow for greater cooperation between countries and also to allow us to achieve the maximum possible level of development. Madam President, I wish once again to highlight the importance of this session of the High-Level Committee on South-South Cooperation, which will, I am certain, allow us to continue to seek common agreements for the benefit of all of our nations. Thank you very much.
Al representante de Guatemala por...
I would like to thank the representative of Guatemala. The next speaker on my list is the distinguished representative of Madagascar.
Ministro de Ambiente.
The Minister for Environment and Sustainable Development of Madagascar.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much, Madam Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It is a real honor for me to say a few words before you as part of this 20th session of the High-Level Committee on South-South Cooperation as the Minister for the Environment and Sustainable Development of the Republic of Madagascar. South-South cooperation represents a particular importance for Madagascar to the extent that it represents about a quarter of official development assistance received by the country. For Madagascar, as has been said in the first report on South-South cooperation in Africa, this targets primarily the mobilization of additional technical and financial assistance to support the implementation of the National Development Strategy and to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals in their three dimensions: economic, social, and environmental. I would like to, in particular, focus on the environment, which in recent years has become a global concern and which is further concerning in countries of the South due to their inequalities vis-à-vis countries of the North. This requires anticipation capacity on the part of countries of the South, and we are therefore deeply convinced that South-South cooperation can provide lasting solutions to the current environmental emergency. As far as Madagascar is concerned, the pandemic has not prevented us making progress towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. The pandemic certainly has held us back a little bit in our momentum, but on the whole, it has also proved an important driver of making us think about South-South cooperation in greater detail. Madagascar remains just as strong in terms of its environmental commitment at the regional and international level. Madagascar has engaged in South-South cooperation to protect the environment and for the management of natural resources as part of the international initiative to restore landscapes and forests. For example, Madagascar, along with Cameroon, has engaged in the South-South exchange, allowing for the exchange of experiences and also the establishment of a joint action plan to achieve the goals or the restoration goals by 2030. The development of the Pan-African Handbook for the strengthening of cooperation and coordination strategies for African countries that have engaged in that initiative also is worth noting. What's more, Madagascar also benefits from capacity building in environmental management as a result of South-South cooperation, among other things in cooperation with the Kingdom of Morocco, Thailand, Egypt, as well as the Republic of India. And green diplomacy with countries of the South has been reimagined, and this is among the strategic priorities of our ministerial department and also remains an absolute priority for the Republic of Madagascar. These initiatives and practices should therefore be increased so that South-South cooperation can constitute an effective response to the current challenge. Ladies and gentlemen, it is high time for countries of the South to accelerate their cooperation efforts to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. In order to do this, it is essential that we redouble our efforts so that the environmental issues be placed on the agenda of South-South cooperation relations with a higher level of ambition. We would like to hope that exchanging development solutions among countries of the South can become something that we can lever, first of all, for the transfer of green and innovative technologies, then to develop pilot sites for the restoration of degraded land and forests, and lastly, to promote good practices in sustainable development, including the development of sustainable and resilient territories, as well as improving access to natural resources. All of this aims to preserve the environment and help us better address the challenges of climate change and also manage our natural resources in a sustainable fashion. We therefore call upon all stakeholders to step up their support for South-South cooperation and to include this in the development and implementation of their environmental programs with a view to the genuine shared undertaking of the peoples and countries of the South in the service of our great shared home. Lastly, South-South cooperation is characterized by solidarity, and so I shouldn't like to conclude my statement without addressing this as well. We, countries of the South, face the same issues and we need to find solutions to them together. As part of this momentum of solidarity, we should adopt a common position on the current environmental problems. We hope, therefore, during this session that we can capitalize on the experience that has been acquired in implementing BAPA Plus 40, and also that our debates will be fruitful and help us make headway in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And with that, I thank you very much for your attention.
Agradecemos a la representante.
We would like to thank the speaker from Madagascar. The next speaker on my list is the distinguished representative of India, Mr. Audiran, Minister of State for Foreign Affairs of India. You have the floor.
Mr. President, it's my privilege to address the 20th session of the High-Level Committee on South-South Cooperation. The COVID-19 pandemic is threatening to set back decades of progress made by developing countries and push millions back into poverty. We need to raise our collective voice for recovery, resilience, and reform to ensure that we go back to the path of development and to the path of achieving the SDGs. The outcomes of the BAPA Plus 40 should lay the foundations for our efforts. Mr. President, COVID-19 pandemic has laid bare the shortcomings of multilateral institutions. It has taken time for multilateral institutions to react to the pandemic and cater effectively to the global South. We have realized that during the pandemic, even the traditional North-South paradigm has not worked well. and the global south have been left largely to fend for themselves. It's here that the South-South cooperation becomes necessary and even crucial. India reached out to 150 countries in a spirit of solidarity to supply medicines, medical equipment, and other urgent requirements when the pandemic began. When we produced the COVID-19 vaccines, we reached out to some of the most vulnerable countries first to provide these vaccines. We have done this in a spirit of South-South cooperation and in the recognition that nobody is safe till everyone is safe. Mr. President, India's development cooperation has taken myriad forms, from providing training to nearly 15,000 students annually from more than 160 countries under the Indian Technical and Economic Cooperation Program to our concessional lines of credit of over 30 billion US dollars, which has provided developmental finance to 64 countries, including to South Asia and Africa. Another modest effort has been the setting up of the 150 million US dollars India UN Development Partnership Fund, which continues to support South-owned and South-led sustainable development projects with a focus on LDCs, LLDCs, and SIDS. In 4 years, the fund has accumulated a portfolio of 66 projects in 52 countries. India is also working actively with countries of the global north to see how best the global south can benefit from triangular cooperation. For example, in the fields of climate action, India has been instrumental in co-founding the International Solar Alliance and the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure with our developed country partners. Mr. President, when we seek to build back better from the current pandemic, it's important that not only should the global south continue to exhibit strong solidarity and share resources, but it is equally important for developed countries to come forward in the same spirit and make sure that there is no slackening in our capacity to achieve Paris Agreement and the 2030 agenda. This is even more true in the case of small states, which have been the hardest hit during the pandemic. In the spirit of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, that is, the world is one family, I would like to reiterate India's steadfast commitment to South-South cooperation. Our approach will be human-centric, based on principles of mutual respect and national ownership, with a commitment to sustainable development for all. I thank you all for the attention.
Muchísimas gracias al representante.
My thanks to the representative of India for his statement. I now give the floor to Ms. Daniela Kitman, Secretary of State of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Romania.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to address on behalf of Romania the 20th session of the High-Level Committee on South-South Cooperation, and allow me in this capacity to highlight a few points. First, I would like to underline Romania's firm support for the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation and for its activity dedicated to promoting policy dialogues, programs, and capacity building. Romania had the honor to be elected in May 2016 as Vice President of the 19th session of the High-Level Committee on South-South Cooperation. South-South cooperation is a valuable complement to North-South cooperation in the global effort dedicated for reaching sustainable development. It also has a pivotal role for the effective implementation for the 2030 Agenda and other international agreed development goals. More than 1 year into the pandemic, there is a clear evidence that the virus has reversed years and even decades of development progress by causing tremendous human suffering worldwide and generating one of the worst economic and social crises in our lifetimes. Moreover, the COVID-19 pandemic represents a test for multilateralism, including for international aid. Closer multilateral cooperation is key in order to overcome the consequences of the pandemic, as well as for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Against this background, a more robust South-South cooperation can notably contribute to moving to a post-pandemic reality and to breaking the cycle of poverty, instability, and development inequalities, while promoting the principle of effective ownership of national development strategies. Second, in line with its policy priorities, Romania responds not only to the needs of middle-income countries, with a special focus on its neighborhood, but also of African countries, least developed countries, and small island developing states. Romania builds on its comparative advantage in the field of good governance, which mainly results from its own transition experience with modernizing public institutions and forging a lasting democracy based on the rule of law. Romania believes that triangular cooperation significantly supplements the South-South format, and it contributes to enabling developing countries to achieve sustainable development through effective partnerships. Except for the COVID-19 related hiatus last year, the annual training program of post-pandemic stabilization and reconstruction, organized since 2008 by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Romania and Ministry of Defense, is an example of involvement in line with the principle of triangular cooperation. In 2019, for the first time, the program took place outside Romania at the headquarters of the African Union in Addis Ababa, and benefited from the participation of experts from many African countries, as well as of African Union officials. Furthermore, Romania commends innovative initiatives for South-South regional health cooperation, such as those of the Africa Center for Disease Control Prevention. In 2020, we granted a voluntary contribution to the center in order to support its health response in developing countries, starting with the focus of most hurt by the crisis. Finally, Romania welcomes the recommendation by the administrator of the UNDP in April progress report, according to which, in order to reduce inequalities, developing countries should foster institutional linkages with the support of relevant UN entities and private sector to improve access to quality education in science, technology, and innovation. We strongly believe that through education, we can fight back on poverties, inequalities, and underdevelopment on long term, improving lives of future generations. At the same time, Romania echoes the UN Secretary General's view that the capacity of young people to become the next generation of development actors is of critical importance to the Global South. Nicolae Titulescu, one of the great Romanian diplomats of the 20th century, who was elected twice as president of the League of Nations, once said that hardship creates the true brotherhood of nations. In this spirit, I will conclude by saying that at the time of hardship, only in full solidarity among our nations, we will gain the upper hand over the pandemic all over the world and achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. My thanks to the representative of Romania. I now give the floor to Mr. Hugo Rivera, the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs and Economic Affairs and International Cooperation of the Dominican Republic.
Señoras y señores, en nombre de...
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of His Excellency Luis Abinader, President of the Dominican Republic, and Mr. Roberto Alvarez, Foreign Affairs Minister, it is a pleasure to take part in such a significant event as is the 20th session of the Committee on South-South Cooperation. It is being held today in a very different context from the meeting in 2019 in Buenos Aires to commemorate the 40th anniversary of the first UN Conference on South-South Cooperation, which was held back in 1978. In 2019, none of us could have imagined the effects brought about by a pandemic. The pandemic wasn't in anybody's imaginations back then. We couldn't have imagined its repercussions. I wish to speak first of all about the importance of cooperation. Cooperation is an ally for development. The Dominican Republic has been both receiving and providing cooperation in terms of tourism, housing, and the purchasing of goods and customs arrangements. The Dominican Republic has been helping the entire region and in particular our neighbor Haiti, where we have provided staff personnel for agriculture and security. We have engaged in cooperation, therefore, not just with Haiti, but with countries of the entire region. We believe that at this time, in particular, South-South cooperation is the most important tool that countries have to address the crisis brought about by the pandemic. Solutions are not always found in our own countries, they are often found elsewhere, and that is why we need to tap into the experience and lessons that other countries have had. And I'm certain that if we work together to bolster South-South cooperation, we can create a better world. The pandemic forces us to think about what cooperation has been like. What are the most important elements of cooperation that countries such as my own, a small country with a middle income, can learn from? What are the lessons we can learn from going forward? We all have something to say and all something to give. We think that this cooperation can have a beneficial effect, not just in recovering from the pandemic, but also after the pandemic is over. We think that by working together, we can ensure that the effects of this cooperation can be beneficial to all. In so doing, we can mitigate the impacts of the pandemic, and we can also unite efforts to ensure, for instance, that the vaccine can be accessible not just to one part of the population or one country in the world, but rather to all peoples throughout the world. In addition to this, we must ensure that there is economic equity to ensure that we all can progress at the same pace and no one is left behind. South-South and triangular cooperation is a crucial part of the effort that we are undertaking at the moment, and that is why we would encourage all countries to cooperate, in particular at this critical time. Thank you. I would like to thank the distinguished representative of the Dominican Republic, and now I will give the floor to Ms. Deborah Rivas Salvedra, Minister of Foreign Trade of Cuba. Your Excellencies, heads of state and government, ministers, heads of delegation, ladies and gentlemen, Madam President, the COVID-19 pandemic is the most recent evidence that the current challenges cannot be addressed effectively in an isolated way, and independent efforts to address them are not sufficient, not just when it comes to achieving sustainable development, but also when it comes to peace, health, and general well-being for all. Respect for international law, multilateralism, alliances, and cooperation between countries are the premises that will allow us to move towards a better future without leaving anyone behind. Unilateralism, interference, and provocation to violence are unacceptable. Cuba reiterates its rejection of genocide and the illegal economic, trade, and financial embargo that has been imposed upon us for decades by the government of the United States, as well as the application against Cuba of the Helms-Burton law and the arbitrary and unjustified inclusion of our country on the list of countries that sponsor terrorism. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development sets out clear targets and goals that cannot be achieved in the agreed time frame unless we promote global alliances and unless we transform our current models of development. And this includes, inter alia, environmental predictions. To accelerate the attainment of the SDGs, we need to beef up means of implementation, in particular international cooperation for development. In this regard, the Buenos Aires Plan of Action and the outcome documents of the Nairobi and Bapa conferences provide guidance that we have committed to follow, both countries of the South and our cooperation partners. However, we need to fulfill these mandates to broaden the scope of South-South and triangular cooperation and to ensure their added value for the implementation of the 2030 Agenda as a complement to North-South cooperation. We need to strengthen national, subnational, and international institutions to achieve these goals. We need to bolster inter-peer learning, the exchange of knowledge and good practices, and technology transfer in mutually agreed conditions. We need to have an innovative and flexible approach when it comes to responding to this pandemic and other possible crises that will allow us to respond in a more timely manner. Greater support is needed from multilateral and financial institutions, and we need to see the United Nations system for South-South and triangular cooperation better equipped to respond. We recognize the efforts made by the UN system and the UN Office for South-South Cooperation, and we are grateful for the joint strategy on South-South and triangular cooperation for sustainable development. Ladies and gentlemen, Cuba reaffirms its commitments to the Buenos Aires Plan of Action and the outcome documents from Nairobi and Bapa Plus 40. And we reaffirm our determination to continue strengthening South-South and triangular cooperation to achieve the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. In the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have showed our commitment to health and life through medical cooperation. Last year and this year, 56 Cuban medical brigades have been providing services in 40 countries. Cuba is also developing 5 vaccine candidates for the benefit of all of our population and for the benefit of other countries too. We hope by the end of August to have vaccinated 70% of our population. All of this has been possible thanks to our government's political will and thanks to the dedication and conscientiousness of our health professionals and scientists and researchers. The world will be able to continue counting on Cuba's cooperation to move towards the successful implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Thank you very much.
De la distinguida.
I would like to thank the distinguished delegate of Cuba, and I would like to congratulate you for the announcement you just made about the vaccination campaign in your country. The next speaker on my list is the representative of Colombia.
Señora Abdullah, director interino.
A very good morning. Mr. Abdulatif, Ad Interim Director, Mr. Steiner, Administrator of the UNDP, Madam President, Honourable Ministers, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Government of Colombia, it is an honor for me to take part in the 20th session of the High-Level Committee for South-South Cooperation. It was very important for us to have been one of the vice chairs of the High-Level Committee Bureau from 2016 to the 11th of May this year. This allowed us to continue to work to strengthen South-South cooperation under the slogan of leaving no one behind. We would like to wish the best of success to the incoming members of the Bureau, Argentina, which has taken over the presidency, and Qatar, Lithuania, Nigeria and Portugal. Latin America and the Caribbean have an important reserve of knowledge, skills and experiences at the national and local level. South-South cooperation allows us to share these skills that we have developed with other countries that may be facing similar challenges. That is why South-South cooperation has opened up new mechanisms and conditions to allow us to develop public policies and take advantage of regional and global interdependence. This allows us to address common challenges in the development domain. Following the principles of solidarity and respect that characterize the Global South, the exchanges of good practices allow countries that receive cooperation to find swift responses and to benefit from successful methodologies which can be tailored to their own realities. For the government of Colombia, it is a source of pride that we are able to implement innovative exchanges of good practices. We believe that the autonomy of states to roll out cooperation programs in line with countries' needs and capacities is an essential value of South-South cooperation. For instance, Colombia, as a provider of South-South cooperation, was able to respond to the requests made by some countries who were affected by hurricanes in 2020, and requests for medical equipment to address the needs caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, requests coming from countries of Latin America, Caribbean, and Asia. In 2020, we implemented 101 South-South cooperation projects through virtual means. This entailed capacities in education, the orange economy, culture, sustainable development, and gastronomy and tourism. The digital environment has allowed us to respond to these challenges with deeper cooperation. We have been able to extend the scope of South-South and triangular cooperation with ambitious agendas, which has allowed us to reach a larger number of entities and people. Clearly, the pandemic has exacerbated inequalities, both social and economic, between states and people. That is why we need to deepen modalities such as triangular cooperation to expand the exchanges of good practices thanks to technical and financial contributions from a third party. I am pleased to share with you that Colombia is carrying out triangular cooperation projects with various stakeholders. These will benefit our partners in Latin America and the Caribbean. Finally, I would like to sign off by wishing you the very best of success in this 20th session of the High Level Committee. Thank you.
Intervención. Agradecemos la
My thanks go to the distinguished representative of Colombia, and I would now like to give the floor to the distinguished representative of Peru.
Desde el Ministerio.
From the Peruvian Foreign Relations Ministry, we would like to commend the convening of the 20th session of the High-Level Committee on South-South Cooperation. And on behalf of Peru, we are grateful for the invitation to take part in this important forum to strengthen the debate on the contribution of South-South cooperation to development. The impact of the COVID-19 pandemic is undoubtedly the most serious complex challenge that our countries are currently facing. Its serious economic and social effects globally exacerbate inequalities and development gaps, and they represent a genuine threat to the progress made in the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. We need to give priority to global humanitarian actions to combat the effects of COVID-19 and guarantee global access to health, nutrition and human security, and optimize mechanisms for the exchange of information, knowledge and success stories, as well as to foster technology transfer, research and innovation to stimulate a sustainable economic recovery from the crisis. This state of affairs requires that we beef up multilateralism. It represents a new challenge for international cooperation, which is particularly relevant in the context of the implementation of the outcome document of the BAPA +40 conference. This takes account of the voluntary, participatory nature of requests for South-South and triangular cooperation, and how it can function as a vehicle to strengthen capacities, to reduce asymmetries, and to foster sustainable and inclusive development, and to build public policies that can be of mutual benefit. Peru is a country that both provides and receives technical cooperation. Over the last few years, we have significantly stepped up our South-South cooperation measures. In 2010, we've moved from 8 projects in 2010 to 78 bilateral projects in 2019. In 33 of them, we provide assistance, and in 10, we receive cooperation. These initiatives have been carried out mainly with countries from our region, with the aspiration, of course, of reaching other regions of the world as well. Since 2019, we have been implementing 15 technical cooperation programs with Argentina, Brazil, Bolivia, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Ecuador, El Salvador, Honduras, Mexico, Panama, the Dominican Republic, St. Lucia, Thailand, and Uruguay. We have been working on domains such as healthcare, the environment, social development, agriculture, tourism, water and sanitation, livestock farming, gastronomy, fisheries and aquaculture, and we have focused on a cross-cutting approach. In Peru, in spite of the global health emergency and the closure of borders, we have been developing projects virtually to bolster national capacities and to bring about added value in the shared development with friendly countries. Peru recognizes the mandate that the UN Office for South-South Cooperation has when it comes to leading global strategy on South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation within the UN system. We call for its support in the strengthening of the institutional framework at the global and regional level, including ECLAC in this effort, to ensure the effective mobilization of financial resources and non-financial resources in this context. We need to strengthen dialogue and the scope of South-South and triangular cooperation. We need to foster sustainable, comprehensive initiatives and ensure that we have innovative solutions for multi-stakeholder alliances. And we must ensure the participation of subnational authorities, academia, civil society, and the private sector. Finally, Peru will continue to undertake a positive role in building consensus to reaffirm the impact and scope of South-South and triangular cooperation in the development domain, working with our partners and with the United Nations system. Thank you very much. I would like to thank the distinguished representative of Peru. We have a few minutes left in our morning session, so I would like now to turn to Mr. Steiner if he wishes to make any comments about the various statements that have been delivered by ministers and other national authorities this morning.
Thank you, Madam President, distinguished delegates. Just to echo perhaps 3 messages that I took away from listening this morning. One, a strong affirmation of the relevance of South-South and triangular cooperation for the way in which we envisage the future of development to unfold. I think sometimes the narrow definition of the boundaries around what is South-South may be evolving, but nevertheless, in the larger sense and context of what we have seen in the statements this morning, I think our continued attention to supporting and fostering and assisting South-South and triangular cooperation clearly have been articulated as a major priority. I think the second major takeaway is the comments on the pandemic and the vaccines. I think this is, as we have also heard this morning, already an illustration of how South-South cooperation perhaps has shown the way for South-South triangular and North-South cooperation during this pandemic. And I think we have heard a number of examples that I think are testimony to the fact that the notion of solidarity and partnership is not something that we need to abandon when we are all under pressure. Yes, there is a short-term temptation for this, but actually, as this virus has time and time again reminded us, there is no end to this pandemic without it being ended for all. And so another illustration of that. Thirdly, I appreciate the positive and strong feedback to our colleagues in also the South-South Cooperation Office. They are an anchor within our United Nations family for this vision that has a long history and a proud future, I believe. And I appreciate also the support that was expressed to UNDP and indeed our sister agencies that are part of this promise to support the continued evolution of South-South cooperation. Here, having also been in Buenos Aires at BAPA Plus 14 as its Secretary General, having sat next to the host country, Argentina, let me also repeat what I think we shared at the time. South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation are not static concepts. We live in a very dynamic world. BAPA Plus 40 was a license also to continue to develop the notions of South-South cooperation, triangular cooperation. And for that, you can also count on our strong support, beginning with the Secretary General, the UN-wide strategy, but also UNDP that has a particular tradition, history, and commitment to South-South cooperation in the future. Madam President, thank you so much, and back to you.
Yes, so we have get to the end of the meeting of this morning. We'll resume this afternoon at 3 p.m. sharp, and we'll continue with the list of speakers. Thank you very much, Madam President. So we can. Thank you very much. We'll resume at 3 p.m. sharp this afternoon. Thank you.